I heard the horses before I saw the dust. 4 riders moving at a walk, unhurried, the particular unhurried of men who have done a thing like this before and expect to do it again without trouble. I was in the barn splitting kindling when Joe's voice went flat and hard the way it did when she meant business, and I set the axe down and picked up the Winchester instead. The sun was already low and orange over the western ridge, throwing long shadows across the yard, exactly the kind of light a man picks on purpose when he wants a deadline to feel like a countdown. Silas Duke sat his horse in front of the porch with a folded paper in his gloved hand. 3 riders spread wide behind him, the way men spread when they want you counting guns instead of listening to words. "Mrs. Calder," he said, like he was reading off the weather. "This creek crosses onto Rocking D Range for 1,100 yards. My lawyer in Cheyenne tells me your husband's filing lapsed the day he died, and the 5 years never finished proper." He held the paper up like it settled something. "Get off my land by sundown." Joe Calder did not move off that porch. "5 years next month," she said. "I've got the receipts and the witnesses, and I've got until the land office closes to prove it, which is longer than you've got patience for, Mr. Duke." Duke smiled the way men smile when they've already decided how a thing ends. The lean rider on his left, a scar cutting through his eyebrow, let his hand drift toward his belt. That was when I stepped out of the barn shadow with the rifle low but ready, and the lean man's face went the color of old ash. "Corbin," he said, like the name hurt him coming out. And everything that happened after that, everything that mattered, went back 2 winters, to a night I nearly died in the very creek Silas Duke now claimed for 1,100 yards of his herd's convenience. I'd been running 4 months by then, since the night outside Fort Reno when I left 11 men fighting an ambush I should have died in beside them. It had come out of a dry wash at full dark, no warning but the sound of it, and in the noise and the powder smoke I had made a choice a braver man wouldn't have needed to think about. I was 24 years old, and more afraid than I had ever let myself know until the moment it counted, and I rode instead of standing. I told myself for the first 100 miles that I was going for help. By the second 100, I'd stopped telling myself anything at all. Desertion carried a rope in the territory in those years, and I put 300 miles between myself and the name Corbin, sleeping under other ones, eating what I could earn a day at a time, or steal when I couldn't, flinching at the sound of any rider coming up behind me on the road. A bounty man caught up to me 2 days east of Joe's place and put a bullet through my shoulder for his trouble. I made it as far as her creek before the ground came up to meet me. She told me later she almost left me for the cold to finish. A bleeding stranger with a Colt still in his fist on a widow's claim 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, a claim that still needed 2 more years of proving before the government would call it hers outright. She had every reason in the world to walk back inside and bar the door. She got a wagon instead. She didn't ask my Christian name until the fever broke 10 days in, and even then she didn't press for the rest of it. She wrote Wade in a ledger and let it be whatever it needed to be. What she did ask, once I was strong enough to sit a chair without the room tilting, was whether I could read. I told her the truth. A farm boy from Missouri with 6 brothers and no money left over for schooling never got the chance. The next morning, she set a Bible and a week-old Cheyenne newspaper on the table in front of me and said, "Well, we've got time before spring planting." Some mornings the word swam and I had to start the same line 3 times before it held still, and she never once made me feel small for it, just refilled my coffee and waited, patient as weather. By October, I could get through a full column of the Cheyenne paper without stumbling, and the evening I read her the shipping prices out loud without a single hitch, she smiled at me the way you'd smile at a fence finally standing straight after a long season of leaning, and something in my chest turned over that had nothing to do with the reading at all. I stayed on as hired help that first summer for wages I never asked for, and she didn't have much spare of $20 a month against the $35 the Rocking D paid its riders, and she apologized for the difference more than I ever did. I told her a man who'd have hanged without her wasn't in a position to negotiate. She said that wasn't how she meant to run her outfit, on a man's gratitude, and paid me anyway, out of egg money and what she got for butter at the Mercantile in Larkspur. 3 cents under what the men's outfits charged, because nobody expected a widow to hold her price, and she'd stopped fighting that particular fact of the world. Her husband Daniel had filed the claim in '82, 160 acres under the Homestead Act, same as half the territory. 5 years to prove it, improved or lose it back to the government, same as it had never happened at all. He'd raised the house and broken 40 acres before the influenza took him in the 3rd year, and she'd kept breaking ground alone every season since, because the law didn't care whose hands did the plowing, only that the plowing got done. 2 more years, she used to say, looking at the calendar nailed by the door like it owed her an answer. 2 more years, and this is mine outright, and no man in this territory can put a hand on it. Once a month I rode with her into Larkspur for supplies, and I noticed early on that the town noticed her, the way a place that has watched a woman survive alone for years learns to watch her differently than it watches other women. Flour ran 3 cents a pound that year at the Mercantile, and Joe bargained the clerk down without raising her voice once, standing straight in her good calico with her chin level, and I stood by the wagon with sacks on my shoulder and caught more than one man on the boardwalk stop mid-sentence to look at her twice. I caught a few looking at me the same way, which was a new and uncomfortable thing for a man who'd spent 4 months trying to be forgettable. Joe noticed it too and said nothing, but there was a particular quiet satisfaction in the set of her mouth on the ride home that I chose not to examine too closely, the same way I chose not to examine most things about her that fall. I fell in love with her somewhere between the reading lessons and the branding that first September, watching her run a hot iron with more steadiness than men twice her size ever showed me, and I never said a word of it, because a man wanted for desertion has no business asking a woman to build a life on top of a lie. There was a harvest dance in Larkspur that October, held in the feed barn behind the church with 2 fiddlers and a wash tub of cider, and Joe made me go because she said a man who never showed his face in town gave people reason to wonder about him, which was more truth than she knew. I danced twice with the blacksmith's daughter and once with a widow from the North Road, and I watched Joe the whole while, out of the corner of my eye, dancing with men who had no debts and no wanted papers, and every right in the world to ask her properly. When Daniel Marsh's cousin from Cheyenne, visiting for the season, held her hand a beat too long after a reel, I felt something ugly and unfamiliar rise up in me that I didn't have a name for yet, and I drank my cider on the porch rail alone until she came and stood beside me without a word, and the ugly thing went quiet again. Some evenings on the porch after supper, with the lamp throwing yellow light across the boards and her hands still smelling faintly of the morning's bread, I'd open my mouth to tell her the whole truth of my name and what I'd run from. The words would sit in my chest like a stone that wouldn't move. One such evening, in the 2nd spring, I got as far as Joe, there's something, before hoofbeats sounded on the ridge road, one of Duke's riders passing slow along the boundary at dusk, not trespassing exactly, just present the way a storm is present on the horizon before it commits to arriving. The moment closed like a door. She never asked what I'd meant to say. I think she knew there was a wall in me somewhere and decided a person gets to keep some walls if they've earned them honest. Silas Duke had been eyeing that creek since before Daniel died, on account of the rocking D running 8,000 head that needed water worse every dry summer, and a widow's homestead sitting on the only reliable crossing for 1,100 yards was, to a man like Duke, less a piece of law than an inconvenience waiting on the right amount of pressure. The pressure started small, fence wire cut in 3 places the spring of the 2nd year, the kind of thing a generous man might call accident, which Joe was not inclined to be. Then a letter from that Cheyenne law office questioning her filing on a technicality nobody had raised in 5 years of quarterly inspections. Then a surveyor Duke had paid out of Cheyenne showed up in July, claiming he needed to re-walk the property line on account of a discrepancy in the county records, and stood in Joe's yard with his instruments for the better part of a morning, finding nothing because there was nothing to find, while I stood on the porch with my arms crossed and made sure he knew I was watching him find it. Then Duke's men riding the boundary at dusk, more evenings than not, watching the house the way wolves watch a fence line, patient and unbothered by time, never quite close enough to be trespassing, never quite far enough to let a person breathe easy. They came at night in August with torches instead of paper. I woke to the smell of it before I heard the shouting, coal oil and dry hay, the barn already burning at one corner by the time I got my boots on, orange light crawling up the old timber faster than any fire I'd seen, throwing wild shadows across the yard where 3 riders wheeled their horses and shouted at each other over the noise of it. The heat hit me 20 feet out, a wall of it, and somewhere inside a horse was screaming in a way that still comes back to me on bad nights. I put myself between the fire and the house and took a rifle butt across the ribs from a man I never got a clear look at through the smoke. And when I came up swinging, I put him on the ground and didn't stop to check whether he got back up. Joe was already at the well with buckets, soaked through and coughing, refusing to leave the line, even when I shouted at her that the barn wasn't worth her lungs. We saved the house. We lost the barn. 6 months of hay and a milk cow that never made it out, and somewhere in the middle of it, passing buckets hand to hand in a chain that was just the 2 of us. She looked at me once, with her face lit orange, and said only, "They want us tired enough to sell." And I understood then that she'd already worked out exactly what this was, and exactly what it would take from us before it was through. In the grey of morning, standing in the wet black ruin of it with my ribs wrapped in a torn shirt, Joe looked at the wreckage and said, not quite to me, more to the whole territory listening, "They think I'll fold. Let them think it a while longer." Which brings the story back around to that porch and Silas Duke's folded paper, and the lean man named Cutter going the color of ash at the sight of my face, because Cutter had ridden with the 9th out of Fort Reno the same season I had, and I was the man who'd pulled him out of a ravine with an arrow through his leg, while 11 better soldiers than either of us never made it home. He owed me a life he'd never expected to have to account for in front of Silas Duke. Duke told him to draw. Cutter didn't move. "Mr. Duke," he said, his voice gone careful, "that's Corbin. Man saved my life at Cedar Creek. I'm not putting a bullet in him over a water crossing." The other 2 riders looked between Cutter and Duke and did the particular arithmetic men do when the one giving orders suddenly looks less certain than the ones taking them. Duke's face went through 3 colors of its own. "This doesn't change the filing," he said, which was the sound of a man reaching for the only weapon he had left, since his hired guns had just quietly declined to be weapons at all. What Duke didn't know, and what I only learned later, was that Joe had woken before first light that very morning, saddled her own horse without waking me, and ridden the 11 miles to Larkspur alone in the dark. dark to stand outside the land office door until the clerk arrived to unlock it. She hadn't told me because she hadn't wanted to say out loud what she was afraid Duke's technicality might actually do to 5 years of her life, not until she held the proof in her own hands. She was back before I'd finished the morning chores, certificate folded inside her apron pocket, and she hadn't said a word about where she'd been. It was Joe who answered him, stepping down off the porch with a paper of her own, the land office certificate she'd ridden to Larkspur for that very morning, before the sun was fully up, stamped and dated, 5 years proved complete as of the 14th, witnessed by 2 neighbors and the county surveyor. Your lawyer's technicality doesn't hold, Mr. Duke, she said. This creek has been mine since before your riders lit that fire in August, and I expect the marshal will find the timing of both papers interesting. Duke rode out with his own paper still folded, and his dignity considerably less so. Cutter tipped his hat to me before he followed, a gesture that carried more than either of us had words for. That evening, Joe and I sat on the same porch boards, where the reading lessons had started 2 years before, and I finally said the thing I'd been carrying since the fever broke. My name isn't just Wade, I told her. It's Wade Corbin, and the army wants me for leaving men to die at an ambush. I should have died in myself. She listened to all of it without her face changing, and when I finished, she said, I've known men who ran because they were afraid of a fight. You ran because you were ashamed of surviving one. Those aren't the same sin, Wade. Then she said the army had bigger concerns than a deserter who'd since put out a fire, mended her fences, and kept a widow's claim standing against a man with 8,000 head of cattle and no shame at all, and that if they ever came asking, she'd have plenty to say about the kind of man I'd turned out to be. I asked her, because I had to, whether knowing all of it changed anything for her. She looked at me a long moment in the lamplight, the same look she'd given me the morning I first managed to read a full page without stopping, and said that a man's worst hour didn't get the last word on him unless he let it, and that as far as she was concerned, mine had ended 2 winters back at the edge of her creek. I stayed, not because the fear left me, but because I finally had something in front of me worth being afraid for instead of afraid of. Cutter rode past twice more that autumn, once to say Duke had sold off part of the Rocking D herd rather than fight the water rights through a judge, and once for no reason he gave, just to sit on the fence rail a while and watch the creek run the way a man watches something he's grateful still exists. Joe never did ask me to make it official, not that autumn, not for a while yet. She just started setting 2 cups out for coffee instead of 1 every single morning, without ever saying why, and some mornings I'd catch her watching me across the table with an expression I finally had the sense to recognize, because it was the same one I knew was on my own face. Some promises don't need saying twice.